It's like an exam is about to start. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you all here. My name is Aurora. I'm the head of entrepreneurship programs here at Cass Business School. And it's a pleasure to have you here. Some of you have come back from previous Entrepreneurs Talk at Cass. So it's nice to see people, keep coming back, and the new ones, and some current students, and some alumni. So it's obviously a great opportunity for all of you, all of us, to meet like-minded people interested in entrepreneurship, innovation, and discuss, just hear about, inspiring people, inspiring entrepreneurs, British entrepreneurs. So we have Emily Brooke tonight, who's the founder and CEO of Beryl, and a partner at Index Ventures, who's Martin Mignot. So the past 4 years I've run this series. I really enjoy it. Last year we had Tom Bloomfield, the founder and CEO of Monzo. That was really nice. And so we had a bit of a gap for various reasons, but it's just, I'm really happy. So usually we have Axel Threlfall, as you know, who's our Reuters editor-at-large, to run those interviews. Unfortunately, last minute, he told me, I'm so sorry, and I know he was genuinely sorry, that he had to go to run a Reuters event in Berlin. How boring. So he was really sorry, and I just thought, well, with so many people clearly interested in coming tonight, and obviously having two people who are extremely busy accept and make time to come tonight, I just thought, no, we have to think of a way to make this happen. And so I thought of various options. And I thought, being a business school, why don't we invite one of our own students to run the interview? What do you think? Yeah. Pretty good idea, no? Yeah. Thank you. So I didn't just pick anyone. I picked James. To be honest, there's a lot of people I could have picked. But I got to know James a bit more recently. We went to Paris. I ran an elective over there. We discovered the entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystem in Paris. And James was one of them. He was super engaged, clearly has a real passion for entrepreneurship. He's a product designer for the Founders Factory in London. He is a master's and MSc in entrepreneurship student at Cass this year. Passionate about art, fluent in English, Mandarin, and proficient in French. That's really why I think that's the proficient in French, is that I need this guy. And so that's why I decided. So I reached out to James and I told him, look, this is a challenge. You've got two, very inspiring, high-profile people here. Are you up for the challenge? And he said yes. He's really excited, and I am as well. So thank you. So the format tonight, as usual, we're going to have a 30-minute interview run by James of Emily and Martin. After that, we'll have 30 minutes for Q&A by yourselves. So we'll have some mics, and we'll just, pass the mics around. That will be for 30 minutes. And to finish, we'll invite you to come for networking drinks afterwards so we can continue getting to know each other and continue the conversation. There are a few, there's a filming company and some photographer tonight. If you don't want to be on those photos, well, just don't put yourself in front of them. No, seriously. And that's it really, I think. So that's it. Martin and Emily are both on Twitter, and that's the Twitter for Cass. And that's it for me. So I hope you enjoy the evening, and I will leave it now to James, Emily, and Martin. Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Hopefully the mics work. Just before we start, Martin just became a father for the second time. So another round of applause. So Emily and Martin, just before we start, could you give us a brief introduction of what you do, what your companies, the VC and your company do?
Sure. So my name's Emily. I am the founder and now chairwoman of Beryl, formerly Blaze. We create technology for cyclists. Our first product is the laser light, which is an innovation that tackles the blind spots, the most common cause of accident. You might have seen it on the front of the Santander cycles. It projects the similar green bike ahead of you onto the road. It started off as a consumer product and my university project, actually. And we're in the bikes of London, New York, Montreal, Glasgow. We co-designed the new Santander cycle in London. We put all the technology on board that bike. But most excitingly is we're now and about to launch our own bike share schemes. So we've designed our bike, the app, the operations, the whole relationships with the cities. We're launching in 3 locations in about a week and a half's time. So Bournemouth, we bought a 5-year contract, but bikes on the street of Bournemouth. London, we've got 4 or 5 boroughs in northeast of London and just won the city of London. So you'll see bikes here, Beryl bikes, next month, and also Hereford.
Thanks. And Martin?
Yeah, hi. So Martin, I'm one of the partners at Index in London. So a few words about Index. We've been doing early stage tech investment in Europe for about 25 years. Opened an office in San Francisco 9 years ago. And we now operate as one single unit between the US and Europe. We're investing across 2 funds right now. One, which is our 9th early stage fund. It's a Series A fund. So when people get started or just after they've gotten started, they have a product, they have some early customers. We tend to like to write the first institutional check, so between $5 and $10 million. And we also have a growth stage fund, which is our 4th growth stage fund, which is about $1 billion, which focuses on a bit more mature businesses, so kind of Series B and above, so between 20 and 80, $90 million per investment. And we do about half B2B, half B2C. We've done a lot of fintech. That's a strong sector for us. Obviously, being in London, quite a lot of SaaS and open source companies on the enterprise software side, and then quite a broad range of consumer investments as well. Some of the companies we've invested over the years. So historically, Skype was one of our first big success, and then after that, companies like King. iZettle, here in London, the companies like Funding Circle, Farfetch, Viagogo, Revolut, Deliveroo, Beryl, obviously, but you know that, and a few others in the US as well. I've been with the firm for about 10 years, and I've been doing mostly consumer or kind of small SME SaaS investments, a lot in the transportation mobility space. So I've worked with Deliveroo for the past few years, with Trainline, where I'm on the board as well, Revolut, BlaBlaCar, and quite a few others like those. So that's the story.
Brilliant. So I just want to go to the topic of mobility and transport, something that I'm sure you both are passionate in, how you guys met, because you're an investor in Beryl. I was in Paris recently, and I think I fell in love with the scooters there. So Lime, I think I spent €50 in a week just on Lime, and I tried the others out. But my question is, as an investor, what are you guys seeing in mobility? And there's so many companies popping up right now. So can you give us a little insight?
Yeah, I think it's I've been passionate about the space for quite some time. And my first investment was in a company called Captain Train, which was a train ticketing engine, which then got bought by Trainline. That's how I ended up there. So that was in 2012. So it's not a new interest. I think what's happening now is that there's a bit of a perfect storm around kind of social networks, new sensors, cheap batteries, and people having kind of smartphones, and you connect all of that together. It allows you to create new vehicles and also to use them in a new way. So scooters and bikes and e-bikes. And the beauty with that is that because it's a very small form factor, you can innovate on the hardware very quickly, much faster than with cars. So you see already you're at 4th or 5th generation of the scooters, even though they didn't exist 18 months ago. The same thing is happening with e-bikes and with a lot of new vehicles happening. So I think that's one of the most exciting area of tech development right now. And one of the reasons why we invested in Bird, so I think you picked the wrong company when you were in Paris, but that's okay. I think it was just a skip of the tongue. So one of the reasons is just that the space is obviously quite large. Today when you go from A to B in most places in the world, you use the car regardless of the length of the journey. And we think it doesn't really make sense. So, I mean, like everything that's below 15, 20 kilometers should be used by smaller vehicles, and the shorter the distance, the smaller the vehicle. So there's going to be scooters at one hand, bikes, e-bikes, And then we start. I don't know. Yesterday, Bird announced this little kind of a two-seater scooter, which is, it's a new. It's not really an existing category, which is between a bike and an e-bike and a moped, and you're going to start seeing a lot of those. So it's pretty exciting.
So Emily, then taking that back and focusing on London and the UK space, we're also seeing a lot of companies coming through. So how do we see Beryl and within that market? How is it different, and what are your hopes with Beryl?
So the UK at the moment is a different market, just because the scooter chaos, craziness, excitement is blowing up everywhere else. I've got a few opinions on longevity of scooters, but they're illegal here for the moment, and probably will be for the next 18 months. So we've got a pretty good platform to prove the bike. And the bike hasn't been innovated on really for the last 250 years, and it's still a very good means of transport across the city. We're developing an e-bike, which is ready later this year. But it's the quickest, it's the greenest, it's the most efficient way to get across most cities. And we are quite excited with the pipeline of cities that are coming on board, coming up to put our vehicles out there. Bournemouth's a really cool testing bed for us because it's got really crap traffic. People have sat in a car all day talking about being sat in a car. And they've got really good bike infrastructure, they've got good bike lanes. It's warmer, it's 10 million tourists a year. So over the summer we'll be ramping up, putting up to 1,000 bikes there by August, September time. And learning. It's the first time we'll have vehicles on street. We're doing things a bit differently, so it's not the kind of scale-fast Asian model of OFO or Mobike you might have seen over the last kind of year here, nor is it the fixed infrastructure of Santander cycles or city bikes. It's a good quality bike, so it's invested to last on street with maintenance and operation, but it's much lighter than a Santander cycle, and it critically has much more technology on board the bike. So we always know where they are, they're always live, they're always connected, and it doesn't rely on the user's mobile phone. So lots of the other ones can pair by Bluetooth, and then you know where the vehicle is. Ours, it's all built into the bike. And that means we can do Beryl bays, so we're doing enforced parking locations. So for example, in Bournemouth at the moment, we've got 180 Beryl bays painted on the road, and you can see where they are by the app, and you're incentivized to go and park your bike in a bay. You can leave it outside work or wherever, but you pay a small premium to do that. And it means that we as a company, we know where the bikes are, so we can do a greater level of servicing, maintenance and redistribution. And the cities love it because the bikes are all neat and tidy.
Brilliant. So you mentioned Mobike and a couple of different models in terms of scaling. Could you give us an insight on your business model and where the money is coming from and from the consumer side as well?
So I think they're absolutely fascinating, and obviously we've had a kind of colourful year or so watching them all explode and come here, and then we've been building our model of bike share and mobility for a couple of years now, and we've watched these guys come in and had to be quite nervous because they kind of came and played on our backyard, but it happened, but played out as we were anticipating it to play out, because in Asia it kind of works where there are very limited other options to get yourself across the city. Or you queue for 45 minutes to get on the underground to start your journey home, and you can jump on a bike and you can get there. But it requires a critical mass of flooding the streets with those vehicles, and they become landfill incredibly quickly. They're very cheap, and you can't do that here. You can't just dump bikes all over the street. And so we kind of saw them come, we saw them play, and we saw them now go away, which has been interesting. And their funding model is also interesting, because I've never sat on a panel with one of my investors.
Be careful, don't you?
There's a lot of them, they are funding those vehicles, and they last, some of the scooter companies, they'll say 3 to 4 weeks, some of them lasting 11 days on the street. And they're funding that with venture capital, and a lot of venture capital for these disposable vehicles, which is, to me, slightly bonkers. So our vehicles are designed to last years, and they're assets. So we're looking at other forms of financing them as well, looking at more like asset financing rather than just raising a lot of equity for these vehicles.
Brilliant. So in terms of, I want to make another comparison, give us a more general insight into the VC aspect and the investment side, maybe bringing a bit of politics. So I picked up on a cheeky Twitter post, Martin, from 2016.
Oh gosh,
Okay.
I love
Don't
it.
worry, it's not embarrassing. It's not embarrassing.
That's sneaky. All
But
right.
it's actually super relevant now, obviously. So just you kept it clean, unlike Donald Trump on his Sadiq Khan tweet. But you said we'll obviously keep investing in the EU and the UK. Like it or not, tech has no borders, and I think that's really relevant now, especially when we're seeing complications with the UK and people maybe not investing so much within UK firms. I know that Index is an international VC, so could you explain a bit about tactics and how the UK companies place themselves?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, we invest across Europe. Actually, originally we started out of Geneva, of all places. I don't think we've ever made an investment in Geneva, actually. But which shows that you don't have, it doesn't really matter where you're from. And we're always ready to travel. And our best investments, had been historically in the Nordics, for example. So we look at Europe as one, as only one place. I mean, we feel truly Europeans, and we also, are well connected to the US. So we don't we're less, I guess, obsessed about local politics. I think we will go where the talent is. It's simple as that. And London still has pretty big advantage, in our opinion, compared to the other European cities. I think that advantage may be, slightly, eroded, but it's still miles away. I think one of the reasons for it is, I spent a lot of time in Paris. I spent quite some time in the Nordics. I spent a lot of time in Berlin, and in most of these places, Berlin is a bit of an exception, but all of the other places in Europe, those ecosystems are extremely local, and in France. The French startups, 95% of the employees are French, if not 100%, until a very late stage, and they typically speak French among themselves. And when they speak English, it may not be the best. They may have, as you can hear, a very strong accent, and that's a problem. It makes it much harder to internationalize, and usually by the time they are ready to internationalize, they say, okay, now we go abroad. It's a big decision. They need to change everything, change their name, change their operating system, whether they need to switch to English, everything that they've written before. Anyone that doesn't speak French can't read it. So there's a lot of these things. Where obviously you come to London, and the first big advantage English is first language, but also you get talent from all over the world, especially from Eastern Europe and Northern Europe, and so. There's no other place like London, so I do think that advantage will remain. Plus, obviously, in terms of sector expertise, especially if you look at fintech, London, there's just nothing coming close to that. I think even globally. Right? So we're still investing a lot here.
Just interesting, just picking up on your point about the French ecosystem, how it differs here. I saw recently that. BlaBlaCar tried to enter the UK market, the French. Yeah. Obviously, you're involved. This is what I'm asking.
Yeah.
And would you agree it wasn't a success in the UK? Obviously, it's thriving in France.
Yeah, no, it wasn't a success at all. Yeah, but I think
why was
that's probably that's the only one of the few cases where it's a French startup in consumer space, which has been very successful outside of France, hasn't been successful here. Has been quite successful very successful in Spain, quite successful in Italy, quite successful in Germany, widely successful in Russia, Poland, Ukraine, very successful in Brazil, Mexico. So I think there are.
It's our loss,
it's
basically.
Not. Yeah, I mean.
Exactly.
It sounds silly, but actually their conclusion was, on paper, all of these markets, should work, and usually the main reason why it doesn't work for them is more cultural. Issues than anything else, and in the UK, indeed, people don't really like to share their own private space, which a car is, right? So,
yeah. So, you grew your company. Where was it initially, Beryl? From university?
It was my university project, yeah.
Yeah. How did you find that experience as a young entrepreneur? The help that you might have had, well, definitely had on the way. Could you explain just a little about that?
Yeah, it wasn't a kind of conscious journey, it was a bit of chaos. I went to Oxford and read physics and dropped out to go and do product design in Brighton, which bizarrely was a lot more fun than physics at Oxford. All I wanted to be doing is art and design. I was never creative subjects, but I was a girl that could do science and maths, which was apparently very important for my career in the city that I also apparently wanted. So I was pushed into Oxford to do physics, left at design. I spent some of my final year doing a long ride for charity. I'd never been on a bike, but decided to cycle the length of the UK for charity. So bought a bike with a girlfriend, learned to ride it over the summer, fell in love with cycling. I went back to my final year of product design and decided I wanted to do something I loved, which was my new love of cycling, and realised that the countryside over the summer had been lovely and relaxing, but the cities were stressful and exhausting. So that's what I wanted to tackle. I wanted to find the biggest barrier for cycling in the cities, which is safety. And developed the laser light at university. Then got sent on an entrepreneurial scholarship to Babson in Massachusetts. But spent about a year faffing about before I actually started the business. Came to London and was in the first cohort of Entrepreneur First, which was really helpful. And then, committed. So that was September 2012. So I didn't know if Entrepreneur First would support me because they wanted me to be building a tech company. They accepted me because of what was then Blaze, but they kind of told me to park it and focus on building a
No pun
tech
intended.
business.
Park it. I'll pick up on these things, but
Yeah.
carry on.
Strong.
Sorry, I interrupted you, but yeah.
But I couldn't leave the company alone. I just kind of kept fiddling with it and playing with it. And the night before the course started, I remember I came out of a coding class late at night and my bike had just been stolen, which irrationally completely broke my heart. And went to call my mum late at night and said, "Mum, I'm really sorry. I can't. I have to be doing this. I have to be doing Blaze." And she said, "I know. We all know that. We're just waiting for you to figure that out." So then just jumped straight in at that. Yeah, I'd never had a job before. I'd never been in the corporate environment. But end of 2012, and then it was all about kind of proving the concept. So the Kickstarter a couple of months later, and then I've been running at it ever since.
So can you tell me how you guys met, through what stage of the company you guys were at?
So actually, we met on a bike. I don't know if you remember that.
Brilliant.
Did we?
Yeah, we did, yeah.
Oh, tech bikers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We cycled from Paris to London together.
Yeah, of course.
It wasn't
That's brilliant.
It wasn't a couple romantic thing. We were about 30 people of us together. But
Sweating as well.
From the tech space, it wasn't glamorous at all, especially
The Lycra was really bad.
Yeah, no, exactly. Especially the British part of the trip.
Yeah, it's grim.
Sorry,
We set off from around the corner, literally around the corner.
Exactly, yeah. So there was like this charity group of tech people in London. So we took part in the first ride from Paris to London. But I think we probably already had invested, and at the time, so you will probably remember better than I do because I wasn't closely involved. But we had a dedicated seed program, so kind of a pocket of the venture fund was dedicated to seed investments. That was led by Robin and Saul Klein, who then left off to start Local Club, which is one of the most prominent seed fund right now in London. And I think that's how, I don't know, is it Robin or Saul?
Saul.
Is it Saul? Yeah, so Saul led the investment.
There wasn't a formal pitch of sorts. There was.
I met Saul at Founders Forum, which is an amazing event, and he asked me for a meeting.
But because it was seeding, it was a bit of a different. It was a
Mhm.
bit of a different process. A bit like usually what we try to do is to have different heaviness of process depending on the size of the check. So these days anything that's below, I think there's like the thresholds keep on changing, but anything that's below 5 million ticket, we can decide locally without US counterparts to be involved. Anything between 5 and 10, a single partner can. You need to involve everyone, but a single partner can basically make investments on their own. There's no vote. And then anything above 10 million invested, it's a bit more formal. Everyone's involved. Everyone has a vote, and then there's some rules on what grade allows you to do what, which have kind of evolved over time to make sure that having a team in the US, especially on the West Coast, 8-hour time difference. You need to make sure that you stay in sync, but you also remain you have enough reactivity. You know, the market is very competitive, so you need to be able to act quickly when need be, while keeping everyone in the loop. So that's how we develop the process.
Brilliant. You mentioned how the cycle ride London-Paris wasn't glamorous. Something that especially my peers do believe is glamorous is a career within VCs. And maybe I feel like the vibe now is it's away from investment banking towards the world of VC. And so I want to ask you, the day in the life of a VC, what are your activities and how busy is it?
Yeah. So look, I don't think it's very glamorous by any mean, but it's a great job. I mean, I've been doing it for 10 years. I love it, and I think I totally understand why people want to do it. You're incredibly privileged. You meet with great entrepreneurs. You get to understand. I mean, it's amazing. I actually can't believe it very often. But I get paid to learn and to work with incredible people. I mean, it's just and I learn about new industries which I have no idea about when I first invest, and then you kind of pick it up. It's just a paid education. It's phenomenal. So I really love that. And you also end up, sometimes when you're lucky, you end up investing. First you develop very interesting relationship with entrepreneurs, but you also end up investing sometimes in companies that have really impact, and that especially when you do consumer investments, people use, and it's quite fun. A typical day, right now I've got about 8 boards. I'd say so. There's 8 companies where I'm quite involved, and that's about half of my time is just working with these companies, and that means various things. I mean, there are different stages of their life, obviously. So and also different stages of our involvement with them. So typically, when we first invest for the first year and a half, it's quite intense, and we really help them and try to set them up for success. Let's help them on that path, and that's where we are the most involved in terms of getting them. A lot of it is around hiring, high-level strategy of kind of go to market, international expansion, and then fundraising when the next stage comes. So those are kind of some of the 3 things that we're most involved with, and that's very intense in the first year and a half because we can really bring our whole network, and we start from scratch. Obviously, as time passes, there are typically more investors on the table, and the network that you expose them to is more incremental than the existing one. Mm-hmm. So that's about half of my day, and then I'd say there's probably 30%, 35% based on focus on looking at new opportunities, and that's the way. I mean, each one is different, but we're not super structured in who is focused on what. And the challenge with Europe is that there is a local element, so you need to know what's going on in Paris. At the same time, you also need to be a bit of an expert in some things, and so there's a bit of a matrix of who covers which geo and which sector, and we need to understand who does what, and that's not it's not super clear, but it kind of works okay. And then the rest of the time is just spent on building our team and managing our team. We've got 55, 60 people now. There's a lot of operational people, a lot of young investors that you need to coach and develop, and we're always hiring for new people. So that's roughly the speed of time.
So I'm sure there are entrepreneurs in the room with their startups. How would they typically, or how would you recommend them approach? You said they're all different, but in your experience, what's the best way of reaching out to?
I mean, nothing super original here. I think obviously, if ideally you would have, because we tend to invest. We like to be the first institution, but not the first money in. And we find that it's easier for us when there has been angel investors or smaller seed funds potentially, because they kind of help structure, the team, the product, they polish the company, overall, and also it in terms of qualifying the intro. Obviously, we receive a lot of cold inbounds, and then having trusted, people we trust and we worked with before, it's just great validation. Look, the reality is like I also tell, I've got people contacting me on LinkedIn, and once, most of the time it's totally rubbish. But I had a call on Monday with a company that contacted me on LinkedIn, right? So if you have no intro, that's totally fine. I'm happy to. I won't always answer, obviously, because I would just be spending my time doing that.
Yeah.
But if it's interesting, I would take the call. I mean, I don't have a religion on finding someone I know.
Brilliant. So Emily, a bit more about your journey as an entrepreneur. The highs, the lows, big challenges. I've just said some general words there, but could you fill in the gaps and give us a picture of what it's like?
Well, it's a roller coaster, as everybody says, but it is. A big one that's often we talk about is the rebrand. It's changing the name. That was fun. Blaze is a really cool name, obviously. But there's a company in America they were called Planet Bike, with a range of bike lights called Blaze. And in my naivety when I named the business, I hadn't realised that obviously trademark law in America is completely different from the UK. And if you're using a name I'd done a search and they had no trademark. If you're using a name in that category, it's yours by rights. And they reached out when we were a Kickstarter. It was myself and an intern. And I said, I'm a little girl from London, university project, it's never going to make it to America. And he said, okay, fine, yeah, sure. If you keep the logo different, that's okay. And then a couple of years later, we started getting a bit more traction, and we got a deal in the MoMA design store in New York to stop the lights, which is cool. And they reached back out and said, stop using our trademark. And I was thinking, well, you haven't got a trademark. So we said it's okay, and kind of they went away, so that was fine. And then a couple of years later, we got the deal with City Bike, which is quite a big one. There's going to be quite a little bit more press out there. And I spoke to lawyers about something else. I said, by the way, while you're looking into this, can you just check we're okay with the whole trademark thing in America? He said they had a trademark. And they looked at it and said, absolutely not, no. They're completely within their rights. They've had that name for 9 years. It's theirs by rights. If you're using that mark, they not only have the right to kind of the mark, but also they can sue you for damages. Under no circumstances reach back out to the company and speak to them, because if they now say jump, you really have to jump. Leave it with me, lawyers between lawyers, we'll come to an agreement, blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, we're in the wrong. Lawyers between lawyers, that's never going to work well. So I boarded a flight the next morning and went to Madison, Wisconsin, where this company was based, to go and meet them and go and have a conversation. So I figured it's human to human. And they're a similar sized company, they do a lot for charity, they kind of had similar morals as we did, and we had a great conversation. Like, the guy was, awesome. Like, he agreed that there was no confusion in the marketplace. If anything, it was in their favour. We do get a little bit of press. We're doing limited things. People would find their company through ours by accident.
Sounds like a win for them.
And I was going to give money to charity of his choice, and he was completely happy. We drew up an agreement together, and he said, absolutely fine, let's go for it. I said, well, one condition, that I'll give you this money to charity as long as you don't send it back to the lawyers between us. And he said, fine, and I left, and then a few years later, hadn't heard anything, chased, and I got an email from him with a lawyer CC'd that said, you have to change, either rebrand globally, pay us hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, or not do any business in North America. So that was the start of renaming. The whole renaming is a whole other story.
Sounds like trouble.
But I mean, to that point, I think the reality is, when I say I spend half my day working in my companies, it's firefighting, right?
Yeah.
Every company, no matter how successful or unsuccessful, is just a sum of problems that need to be solved every day, right? So, you can either see it as, oh my God, it's so bad, but after I've been doing it for 10 years, and you've been doing it for a while as well. After a while, it just becomes, every day you wake up and you're gonna have, okay, what is coming my way today? It can be a lot of different things. It can be lawsuits, can be people leaving, I mean, this every day is a new day on that front. And I think that the reality, anyone who's been an entrepreneur or is an entrepreneur in the room will know that the press typically focuses on either the very big thing, the big successes and the dream stories, or the big failures. At the end of that, when you see how the sausage gets made, it's actually quite similar, the big successes and the big failures, where just a sum of problems.
Brilliant. So just before we hit the Q&A session, some advice for the young entrepreneurs in the room. One piece of advice.
Get on with it.
Very short, very short. So yeah, can we give a round of applause to Martin and Emily? I think I'm in time. Time-wise, how are you guys doing? You guys are good?
Martin, what's your advice?
There was a tweet, I think, I don't know if it was on LinkedIn or Twitter. It was someone
I'll
was
check
saying,
your Twitter, don't worry.
I've got a friend who doesn't know about whether he should or she should start a company straight out of uni or should go to work somewhere, and what should I tell her? And I think the advice should be to start a company. I mean, it only gets harder, so you might as well start early.
You learn so much
So
more.
it's the same thing as Emily said, basically.
Just
In
a bit more
a few more
eloquent.
words.
Are we good for Q&As? Yeah. So who's picking? Do you guys want to pick?
No.
Right. I don't want to be unfair. Okay, first. Okay, they've already given them.
Hello, my name is Ruben. You said you didn't like sort of urban mobility of scooters quite vehemently. Why is that?
Oh, blimey.
Is that for you?
Yeah. So, a few things.
We disagree on that point, just before disclaimer.
They're not particularly safe. In fact, they're rather unsafe. I mean, drivers don't look for bikes yet. We've been showing the road for a few hundred years, and a wally going vertical through traffic isn't seen particularly well. And two wheels very close to the ground, and certainly with potholes or cobbles, aren't a great combination. The design of them, they literally, they're getting better, and they will be told they're getting a lot better, but they are disposable, lots of them. They don't last 2 seconds on the street. And they're not solving a great problem. I mean, they're not really being used for distances that are getting more people out of public transport or their cars. We were actually at a conference in San Francisco the start of the year, where there was a VC on stage who kind of very proudly said that they're monetizing walking, which is what often they're doing. They are typically journeys under a quarter of a mile, which probably should be walked.
I like the impression.
So yeah, there's a few reasons. I mean, I think there is going to be a Bird has literally just announced they're releasing one, but there's space for a single occupancy electric vehicle of the future that I think a lot of us will be getting around on. The bike and the e-bike are getting a long way and can get you pretty much most of those journeys, but the scooter is dangerous, and there's kind of a blend between the scooter and a bike, and the e-bike, I think could be a pretty good option for a independent mobility of the future.
This is for Emily again, but that'll probably be a nice one. I'm a regular cyclist and was unfortunately the victim of being knocked off by a car recently.
Sorry.
Which, these beautiful summer nights are good, but visual cues don't work the same. And with sort of phone zombies walking around all the time, a audio cue is often needed, and those are much harder to find or just not available, or they take too long. If you have a whistle, by the time you get to it, the moment's happened. Are you doing anything in that space, or do you see anyone doing that? Because it seems like it's sort of like the other half, short of surrounding yourself in a sort of big puffer
Lazy.
jacket.
Yeah, when I first developed the laser light, I looked at that as an option. There's different ways of alerting drivers around you of your presence. Looking at infrared tagging to drivers, audio specifically. One, it's quite difficult to make something loud enough that drivers, especially big trucks, can hear. Two, the ones that are out there, to find a rider that's going to use it intuitively and immediately in that moment when you actually need it, whether it's a horn or a bell, isn't actually shown to be used. And just shouting "bike!" I bike along in a bike if I'm about to step out. Works quite well.
You notice my voice has gone a bit. That's a lot happening.
I just holler bike.
Hi, my name's Ali Kazmi, and I have a question for Emily. It's a personal question, which is what's what's been the most emotionally difficult decision you've had to make as an entrepreneur, and how did you handle it?
I mean, it's definitely going to be a people one. It's definitely, I love my team very, very much. We had an interesting challenge. We had the kind of opposite challenge of all the startups in East London, where nobody left. We had a lot of people there for a long time, which is amazing. But people who, if I had to give somebody some advice who's starting a business, I think one thing to bear in mind is when you start, everybody has to do everything. You've got a team of very young, very passionate, very capable generalists, really. You can get mucked in on whatever today's challenges is, these problems that we're talking about solving, you just figure them out. So whether it's marketing or it's manufacturing or whatever it is, that means that people, as the company grows, people need to work out what they specialize in and where they focus and whether it's going to be HR or it's going to be whatever part of the business, and to therefore train up in that area. Because I didn't have the foresight to kind of say to a young team they should be thinking about where they want their career to go. And often most of them hadn't even had a career before we'd started the business together. So then they get to an uncomfortable position with the businesses that decide you're bringing in expertise, you're bringing in HR manager, you're bringing in finance director or whatever it might be. And the people who've been there for a very long time aren't necessarily the right people for that role. And we will do everything you can to train them, to skill them up, or to get them there. But often it's just that it's not the right fit for them, it's not the right fit for the business. So that's always a difficult conversation. So in fact, to be honest, it's never been, it's in my mind, it's always been a horrific thing upcoming, and in the aftermath it's actually totally good and fine and wonderful, and it's the right thing for everybody. But those sort of issues to tackle, I find I sometimes need to go and take myself off for a blab around the bottom for an hour or so and come back. But yeah, people stuff.
So I have a question for Martin. Hi, I'm Nicolette. So you mentioned that some of the reasons why the European VC and startup activity is behind that of the US are the localized ecosystem and language barriers. Is there anything that you can or are trying to do to sort of break these barriers down?
Yeah, so there are a few topics. So historically, capital was a big challenge in Europe. I think that's not the case anymore. So at least that's a positive. There are a few things that are really working in startups' disfavor. One is, which we've been lobbying for about 2 years now, which is around option pools. Obviously, stock options are critical for startups. That's the only way for them to attract talent, and talent is critical for these early stage companies. It's the only way to compete against the big companies, against banks, against Google, against all of these the giants. And the problem in Europe is that a lot of the countries in Europe have no or very poor stock options plans. Two, they are totally different from market to market. So whenever you expand your company across geo, every time you go into a new market, there's a big question about how do I set up options, how do I incentivize people, are they going to get taxed locally, is it going to be a nightmare, and so it just wastes so much time. So option hiring is one, and then in general, there's just the fact that not having obviously the EU has done a pretty good job at unifying the market, but still challenging. Every market is a new language, a new payment system, so there's still a lot to do just to increase, to make it faster to go, to expand, especially for consumer companies, but also for SME SaaS companies. Obviously, that's going to take a bit more time, and I think that's with the UK leaving the EU, that's not really going to help things going forward. But that's the big drawback.
Thank you.
This side's it,
Oh yeah, this.
Oh, is it me? Sorry. Hi, I've got, since we've got the two of you in the room, I wanted to ask a question about the investor relationship and how do you manage that, and what are the pros and cons, without putting you on the spot, of course, in front of your investor, of going for an investor over loans or...
I'm not really working directly with Emily. I'm not on a board, so I won't take anything personally. That's okay.
So I'm really bad at updating my investors. Really, really bad. My criteria has been pretty much we want to be able to get on with it and have light touch investments, which is what we've managed to achieve. Index invested really early on, so it was a very small ticket size, so it didn't have a board seat or anything like that. We've since raised money from a VCT, Pembroke VCT, so we had a board member from that for a while, but not really any control after that. And then since then it's been private backing, and it's been, most recent, just to accept another 5 million, which came with no voting rights at all, and ordinary stock across the board. And it's meant that we can grow the business that we want to grow. It's been, it's different things for different businesses, but it's given us a lot of freedom. And times like, I remember when we had the investment director on the board from the VCT, kind of being given the advice that when we got the deal from the Boris bikes, for example, Santander cycles, to look at doing that it was really exciting for us. It was going to get our innovation on potentially thousands of bikes in London. It was going to get the product seen. It was perfect, but he could tell us, "Oh, you're not selling enough bike lights. Just go and focus on that one thing. Go and focus on doing that properly before you go off and diversify." And if he'd had the ability to tell us to do that, and obviously potentially wasn't the right investment director for us at the time, but we would have been really limited, and we'd be selling bike lights today.
Well, yeah, I think I would add to that I think that's one of the reasons why we've stopped doing seed, or at least as many seed investments, is that we being an investor in a company where we don't really contribute as much is not really on brand, I would say. It's not really something we're proud of. It's not something we want to, that doesn't help us. That doesn't really help. The entrepreneur probably doesn't care, but it doesn't really help us, in any way, and it doesn't really help the company so much. And that's why we've decided to really focus on Series A, and pretty much every investment we make now, we try to get a board seat. Sometimes we can't if it's too late, or there is just the board is already formed, and we're a small shareholder. But early on, usually we do get a board seat, and that means having at least the board. But usually the interaction is much more frequent than that. It can be daily with some entrepreneurs, and at certain times, most typically weeklies or a few times. There's at least a formal interaction per week, by email or phone call, and then nowadays it's all kind of WhatsApp. I WhatsApp with my entrepreneurs, most of them multiple times a day, right? So you got a pretty broad range of engagement models.
Burning question over here.
Thank you for your time. I have two questions for Martin. The first one is probably about the series of recent IPO events and the way how they gone. So, for example,
Sorry,
Uber.
I didn't get that.
Yeah, so how the recent IPOs, for example,
IPOs,
Uber, Lyft, they all went
Yeah.
quite poor. And do you think that's showing that there is a quite bubble creating in the market right now, where mega funds like SoftBank are driving up the valuations, where the businesses are not really worth that much, as for example as Uber or Lyft, compared to good businesses as Zoom? And do you think that basically there is a market cycle, and for example, what time we're at right now in this market cycle? And the second question would be around celebrity funds in the US. So quite a lot of celebrities investing their money in startups, and there's been some activity in Europe as well, but not as strong as in the US. Do you think that's coming? That's basically what's the value driven? What's the value which celebrities can bring into startups? Is it the fame and the marketing, or there is something else rather than that?
Yeah. So two very interesting questions. On the first one. It is true that in general, consumer startups have had a bit of a bad rep and a tough time in recent years. And B2B SaaS companies especially have done phenomenally well as a category. I do think I'm more of a consumer investor historically, and I think a lot of these companies are very unfairly treated, obviously. But it is true that they have, if you look at Uber especially, I think SoftBank do have some impact on the market, and by providing a lot of capital, too much capital in my opinion, very early on, they almost force the companies to spend it and to be inefficient, and then the effort and the time, and then you get into kind of bad habits, and you're not as focused on the economics. But the reality is that what I see with some of my companies is that when they decide to actually improve monetization, there's quite a lot of pricing power, and I won't give names, but I think consumers are getting quite addicted to these services, to the convenience of it, to the choice, and as volumes increase, obviously, usually prices can be decreased, and so I think that the economics will look much better in the long run. In general, I mean, I think there are some companies which have, I won't go into detail of more specific companies that do have some more specific challenges, but I think the market in general of the kind of all on-demand economy is being pretty unfairly treated. The celebrities, reminds me a bit of, especially in Europe, we had quite a few kind of media for equity deals, so there were a lot of media companies saying a venture fund, but instead of money, they would give you kind of free advertising, which always turned out to be very expensive advertising because it didn't really work, and they would still have equity in your company. So I think that's, I'd rather pay them as influencers and get kind of money for my bag. I mean, then if they want to be involved and if they're all great people and they can help, that's fantastic. If it's just for the name, I think that's a bit of a short-sighted strategy.
Hi, my name is Morgan. I was just wondering what inspired all three of you, so James as well. What inspired all three of you to be where you are now? So your studies, making laser lights, or others. What inspired you to be here, basically?
Yeah, Aurora actually made me come. But
go ahead.
So entrepreneurship, I find such an exciting journey, learning about it, meeting people, and the thing that I like to say is, for me anyway, it makes me feel very human. Like if you have an idea, it's very pure. Like if you have an idea and then you communicate it to people, you get people to invest in it, and then you develop it with just the skills that you have. I think that's just very human. So entrepreneurship fascinates me in that way, and also, so that's why I'm here. But yeah.
The truth for me, which is not in the press or in the articles, and probably well it wasn't, but I lost somebody when I was 25, and he inspired me. That's why I got on a bike for the first time. Him and his sister and I decided to cycle the UK together, and I learned the lesson the hard way that life's for living, and I want to make him proud, and I want to build something of value.
That's a good question again. I think for me, I mean, my dad inspired me actually. He's an entrepreneur, and when I was a teenager, every evening he would come into my room and he would talk to me about his business and ask me for my opinion and what I would do, and I think that's what I do 15 or 20 years later. So I do think there is some a thread here.
Yeah, hi. Emily, question for you. So you talked about your own bike coming in and like designing one. Is differentiation a factor which you look at more? Because like Jump recently, which is from Uber, started coming up with like heavily loaded tech bikes of their own. So how big is that a factor for you, and like what differentiating factor do you specifically look for, even like when you're working on the design cycle for your bike? Good
question. I think it's super important. I think walking down the street, you see that vehicle and you make a decision whether you want to get in it or not. And the look of it, the form of it is a huge part of that. Turns out it's a little bit easier to make a bike than it is a bike light. A bike light, you start with a blank page and you could, how many lights is it going to have, what shape is it going to have, what's it, all the components. But a bike has 2 wheels and a frame and handlebars and a post and a saddle, so it's more of a sourcing job. But in that, when we designed it, we worked with Ben Sarotto, who's a very, very famous bike designer who designed city bikes in New York, and with a company that was very much, we started the user-centered approach and a lot of research into what would make the dream bike share bike. And big part of that is the perceived dream bike share bike, like what does somebody look at on the street and want to get on. And lots of things that came up. The number one thing was the weight, the perceived weight of it. If it looks very heavy and cumbersome, a lot of feedback of certainly the docked schemes have these quite cumbersome bikes. So that was like one of our main priorities. And height. So our bike is 20% lighter than a Santander cycle, but it's also for somebody who's 4'11" up to 6'5". So that was really important. The colour, we've got a Beryl green, which is quite eye-popping, but it's also not offensive, as some of the others, I think, potentially are on the urban landscape. But yeah, I think the design, the look and feel of the bike is super important.
How much time do you have?
That's okay.
Easy.
For Emily, could you talk a bit more about the ideation phase from going from bike lights to cycle hire, and also how was it a pivot, was it an evolution, and how you spun that to investors and the story there?
So yeah, good question, because it does seem like a bit of a leap. But it came about because we developed the laser light as a consumer product, then we integrated it into the Santander cycles, and that came with a whole long process of working with TfL, a year and a half probably before they adopted it for the whole fleet. And then we got the gig to co-design the new Santander cycle, and that we did lights, laser, GPS, Bluetooth sensors, all the connectivity. And that was a process where we knew that bike was going to be out on the street for 7 years, and the world of mobility is changing really fast, and you're going to need a lot more technology on board that bike than it currently has. There's a bit of a process of dragging TfL through the mud of innovation and saying, come on, this is what you need. But in that process and working with them, it was a really, to their credit, and so Serco had the contract to operate the scheme at the time, they still do most of it. Serco's TfL and Santander were the sponsors. Working with those people, we learned a lot about how the scheme operates. It is arguably one of the best run micromobility or bike share schemes in the world, mainly because of the KPIs that TfL put on Serco. But through that, we saw all the reasons why it's great and all the reasons why it could be done better. And at the time, this more light touch form of micromobility was popping up. And we initially were going to do it actually as a JV with Serco, who are a 70,000 person company, and we at the time were a start of about 12, I think, maybe a bit more. And then we realized that they couldn't move as fast as we could, and actually we were trying to teach them what we knew. And why don't we do it ourselves? And that leap was quite a big one, but at the time it was kind of like it was step by step internally, and it kind of felt quite natural. We just ended up taking more of the value chain, more of, first of all it was the technology on the bike, and then it was the actual bike, and then it's developing the app. But that was the biggest switch, going from a hardware business, a pure hardware business, to a hardware and software business. So hiring a technical team, learning all about that. That was, we have a product design team. We're talking about product design in different. Are you product designer? In my original world, is you build shit. The product designer now, the rest of the team is you're building an app or a software product. So we have some quite funny kind of conversations in the office about who's the head of product. It's a very different business and has different challenges. But yeah, I sort of feel like I've kind of run a couple of businesses now. It's kind of the consumer business, then it was the B2B, putting tech in fleets of bikes, and now it's an operations fleet where you've got warehouses and workshops and mechanics and a whole different setup. Keeps you learning.
Hello.
Oh,
Hi.
okay, so, this is going to have to be the last one.
Yeah, hi, good evening. My name is Konark, and I run this company called Rural Handmade. We connect rural artisans to the global consumer market with the help of data and design. My question is for Martin. This is regarding the mindset of an American VC versus an European VC. right? Every now and then we keep hearing about these crazy valuations American firms have, and never ever we hear about the same thing about an European organization. So what are the key things that we can actually learn from American VCs and versus the European VCs, and how could we kind of learn as a business to kind of have the approach in the business to grow, basically?
So I don't. The problem with that question is that I don't know where we would sit, because we are not a European VC and we are not an American VC. We're both, and so we compete with Sequoia and Benchmark and Andreessen on the West Coast, and we compete with Axel and Boulderton and Atomico here, and now they all do everywhere, or at least the US guys are coming here a lot more. So I think this distinction between US and Europe VC is evaporating, simply because as it has no borders, and the US VCs are coming here and we are going there. And you look at companies like Deliveroo, they've raised $1.5 billion to date. So I don't know how much more you want them to go for, but it feels to me like it's quite a lot. So I think the problem is not with the VC. The problem is with the companies. The reason why there isn't this huge valuation, as many of these huge valuations and these huge rounds, because there are not as many of these great companies growing as fast. It's as simple as that. I think when you have an exceptional company that's growing very fast, attacking a really big market, a very aggressive entrepreneur, you can do like Deliveroo and raise $1.5 billion coming from London. That's no problem. And we at Index have been working with a few of these, which have raised hundreds of millions. The Revolut of this world, and Deliveroo and Farfetch, and they're all. I mean, that's the thing. They're all like, if I ask you what are the 10 European companies that are worthy of more than 500 million invested, I think you're going to have a hard time finding these companies, unfortunately. So it is changing, and you see there are way more than they were 15 years ago, and our belief and conviction, and why we're investing so much here and raising bigger and bigger funds, is that there is going to be more and more and more, and the pace is accelerating. There's no question about that. And now you start seeing a new generation of companies, and the bar has been set higher. I mean, when we sold Skype at the time, it was kind of first $1 billion plus exit. It was an immense moment. It's remained for a long time as the bar to reach. Now $1 billion exit in Europe is fairly common, and you look at IDN and Spotify being worth north of 20 billion. I think that's the new, so the bar, and that's only been 10 years. So it's nothing. So that's the new bar, and we think that in the new generation there's going to be companies worth 50 plus, and that's going to become the new bar. So I think it's earlier. The markets are more fragmented, so it's harder to grow fast and at this mega scale. So there's always going to be a bit of a disadvantage here, but there are also going to be companies that have a global market from day one and can scale globally from day one, and these companies will be able to raise massive amount of money and be worth more than 20 billion, and they will raise here with us hopefully, and most likely they will also raise from the US at some point, because it is true that even though there is some capital, there is more capital here. Once you get very, very big, you still need some of the US, the Fidelity and the T. Rowe and some of the big US, really big US funds. If you look at Deliveroo cap table, it's pretty good. It tells you pretty well what is a typical journey for one of these companies. It starts with us and Axel, and then some local big fund like Bridgepoint, and then you get DST and Green Oaks, kind of growth stage US type firm, and then you get Fidelity and T. Rowe, mega asset manager. And then you get, Amazon. That's that's another story. But those are the different layers, and that will remain for the time being. I guess the way you need to finance yourself if you need that amount of capital in Europe.
All right. Well, thank you.